stick with me past that new digital screen and the home appliance like start button, what you'll find in this video is probably one of the most capable and affordable sports cars in the whole world. Welcome to our new rapid review series where you're going to find a shorter and sharper take on your favorite cars. And what better car to start the series with than a new 911. The Base Carrera that we're driving today has always been a car that's been underestimated. It's cheaper than everything else, sitting just under 100k, and your ego prompts you to either spec up or look up in terms of model. But for me, it's a car that I've historically found to be the best road car that sits under the GT3 in the entire 911 range. And now we have the 0.2 update in the 992. So the question is the Base Carrera still the best road car of the bunch? Let's find out by first deconstructing the car together. So guys, 0.2 992. Let's start off talking about the design. I think this is again a case of 0.2 being superior in looks to the original. If we compare it to the pre-facelift, and it's quite a nice throwback actually that our first ever 911 on RBR was in Guards Red. And it gives you a really vivid example of how different these two are. I never liked the original, neither in the standard form or in the sports design package. They never really tickled me. They felt under-designed. Whereas you look at the new one, and I think both on the front and the rear, they've taken a lot from the GT department in terms of design cues. I really think the front looks really aggressive, even in the base form. First of all, you've got the merging of the lights in the new Matrix LED lights. These are our standard lights in our car here, but you still have the 4-dot system as you do in most Porsches. And that's gotten rid of the auxiliary extra lights that we had within our intakes, meaning that our intake space is actually larger and thus better for cooling. And then you actually look at that bottom half and it's got such sharp edges across the sides of the bumper. Again, I think inspired by the GT department design. We look at the rear, and I'm not sure about this thicker rear light. It definitely widens the look of the car optically, particularly then with the bit that I do like about the rear, which again is those really defined side creases on each shoulder, again stolen I think from GT department. So I really like both. I can forgive the thicker light design. The rear deck lid has fewer cooling fins, and now we've got 2 additional air intakes in there as well. And then we've got the sports exhaust system on this, which is why it's got the round pipes rather than the square. I'm not so certain about the aero wheel design, but you do have a whole host of designs available, and this car can look massively different depending on the spec that you go for, even in the base car. So overall, the design, I think a great massaging of the original, and to me, vastly superior. But what's nice about 911 and other Porsche models now is that Porsche are starting to differentiate each model lineup, so you can't just buy a sports design package and have the car look like a GTS or a Turbo. Now the sports design package very much sits on its own, and the Carrera S does as well, using the same body, and that kind of reminds you of the 991.2 GT3, but we'll get onto that another day. And then our GTS looks totally different with its active aerodynamic front end, and I think the Turbo is going to follow suit with its own design. So it's great that now if you buy a higher model, it's actually going to look that way and you cannot be mimicked. Then we come to performance, and our base Carrera hasn't really changed that much actually. So we still have the same great flat 6 engine, but we've got upgraded turbochargers from the previous GTS, which might attribute to that tiny increase of 10 PS. So we've got 394 PS total, the same amount of torque of 450, and it improves 0 to 60 of 3.9 seconds if you have the sports Chrono package with the launch control. Brakes, steering, chassis and suspension are pretty much unchanged versus 0.1, and this car is of course rear-wheel drive in its base form, and you get the PDK 8-speed. You cannot get the manual though. For that, you'll need to go up to the Carrera T, which is about £10,000 more, but comes standard with the manual, with that wonderful wooden shifter and all new ratios for that manual box as well. This car also has lightweight glass. We've got a mechanical diff, we've got reduced insulation, and it comes standard with a lowered ride height thanks to pasm being standard in this as well. And overall comes in just under 1,500 kilos, and like I said, about 10k more. So that's the one to consider if you really do want a manual. So in the end, not that much has changed in the base Carrera. Is that a bad thing? I don't think it is, and we'll talk about that now. As for the GTS, that's a different kettle of fish. We've got a hugely different car there with the T hybrid system, so look out on RBR for our full feature-length video on that car coming very soon. Now, let's head inside. Our collective aversion to the removal of the analog tachometer and the twisty start button is a case that automakers need to study. because it's the removal of what to them is a seemingly insignificant point, yet something that you look at every single car review, every social post and all the comments underneath, is something that all of us feel so passionately about. But it really matters to us petrol heads, doesn't it? We equate quality with the touchy-feely analog aspect of the things that we buy. No surprise then that GT department insisted on keeping the twisty start button at the very least. Now let's talk about it, first of all, with the driver zone. Okay, there's bad points, but there are also good points to that entire thing. It's very well appointed in terms of different screens from a customization point of view. We have like full maps, we have a track mode like you'd only find in the GT cars previously, a number of different main views that you can customize, and the classic 5-dial 911 screen, though in this one you can actually see all the circles, which is not historically true of 911. There was always 2 hidden, so boo to that. But that leads me to another point where this screen is actually quite small, even by digital screen standards at Porsche, versus Taycan is a whole 4 inches smaller, and it looks like a poor man's version of that screen because purely of the size. And even versus the pre-facelift's digital analog hybrid, it's like 6 inches shorter, and it really feels it if you're used to that car. I would love to see them bring the analog tacho back. There's no reason why you can't add more digital into the analog side while having the 2 screens on the side. But apart from those 2 changes of your start button and the screen in front, it's pretty much the same interior here. What has changed, a few finished items, like our drive mode here is a standard across the line now, but it has a slightly different finish here, like a black chrome, which is quite nice, which matches our gear selector over here and the knobs on this side. And then our sport response button in here is a nice matte red finish as well. Finally, some things that I absolutely loved. We've got a wireless charging tray in here, but it's cooled. So it will charge up to 15 watts, but it won't let your phone overheat. And it's brilliant for actually wirelessly charging your phone quickly and efficiently, which I haven't seen any other car do. Porsche now do it in quite a few cars, and it's a very good thing. Another great thing is that the heated steering wheel and the heated seats come as standard, and particularly in the cold that I'm filming in at the moment at about 4 degrees, it has been an absolute godsend every morning going out in this car, so that's been great as well. And then the system itself, very familiar, a few incremental betterments here and there. It's got deeper integration of CarPlay where you can control things like ambient lighting, climate, etc. through there, but it's a trusty system and it works well. Overall, this has always been a great modern interior. Now matches the rest of the Porsches being digital. Whether you can get over that or not is a subjective point. What isn't subjective, I think, is the ride of this thing. Let's go out on the road and drive the Base Carrera. The first thing that I want to address with you guys is price. This is a sports car in 2025 that you can buy for under £100,000. Even if that's just by £200, that represents huge value for money. Especially if you calculated inflation, then this car should have actually been more expensive than it is today. Now our car today comes spec'd with £15,000 worth of options that you can see here, and they're all nice options, but I would be happy to do away with every single one of them, because the thrill of the Base Carrera has always been how brilliant it is without a single option ticked. Now in terms of this update to the Carrera in point 2, there's hardly anything changed, and there's hardly anything different you notice in terms of the drive itself. But that's okay, because that only affirms what was already a brilliant sports car, even without a single option ticked to modify the drive in any way. And it is a brilliant car in every discipline. Now you might doubt me saying speed and power, where you look at the figure and you're like, oh, I want to get a Carrera S or a GTS, but trust me, it's got just the right amount of power for normal roads. And you access that reservoir of power all the time, thanks to the level that it sits at. And because that power is so readily accessible, it allows you to really wring the neck of the car and not just push the car and understand its limits, but understand your own limits as a driver as well. And I think in any performance car, that is the most rewarding experience that you can ask for on a daily basis. In my estimation, the PDK has always been better than the manual. Now the Carrera T is apparently vastly improved with new ratios, so we can see that one day. But it really shifts fast. It shifts faster than all of its rivals, and because of that, you get that added confidence to then drive faster. And I really recommend you keeping the car in manual when you want to have fun, because you'll extract the most fun out of it, and the best sound you can as well. Now, speaking of sound, our car today has the sports exhaust system, which it does make it deeper, but again, it's not something that you need to spend on in my estimation. But would I miss it if it didn't have it? We can turn it off and see. It doesn't make a massive amount of difference in my opinion. It's no GT3 where you go above 5,000 revs and suddenly the note changes. It never hits that high note. So in that regard, I think you could easily live without it and the standard one would be fine. And it's, I think the one thing I miss from 991 generation and previous, that you don't have that lovely natural flat six sound. Handling is predictably sublime, particularly when you put the chassis into sport suspension. Steering feel is unlike anyone else in the market. They just do it so well, so communicative, and then builds upon your confidence to then push the car further, learn what you can do, learn what the car can do. I love it. It's only when you hit some kind of uneven road surface and the car gets unsettled, which it does with this suspension, do I remember then I'm not driving my GT3, it is just a normal Carrera. Now, Sports Chrono package does come with a launch control, and I did try a couple of attempts, but it's so cold and wet right now that I just wasn't able to get time for you guys. I have no doubt in the dry they can achieve that 3.9 figure or better, but I just can't test that for you today. In terms of comfort, if we settle down into the normal mode, this is a rigid sports car, and it feels it. That being said, in daily duties, I've been happy to do shorter trips. I've been happy to do longer trips, particularly with the insulated glass, which is an additional option. And I think that's where the Base 911 needs to sit. It needs to be good at daily duties. And in terms of practicality, the front can eat a small baby pram, which is great. And of course, you've got your now optional rear seats, which, although small, they do the duties of carrying little people and luggage around. So final thoughts, guys, I love the Base Carrera. A lot of you know I daily my GT3 Touring, and this car is so similar to that in daily duties, everything under 5,000 revs, that I even found myself sometimes fishing for my twister starter knob on this side. Porsche could have gotten away with either pricing this car much higher or deleting the Base Carrera, forcing you to get a Carrera S or higher, particularly in a world where the R8 doesn't exist anymore, the F-Type is gone, and our closest AMG GT in price is a 4-cylinder Grand Tourer. Thank God then the Base Carrera still exists, and it's at still such an affordable price, and a car that we can genuinely consider buying in 2025. And I think the best way I could put my love of this car is that even when I owned the GTS in the previous generation, I openly admitted that the only reason I bought that variant was residual values and bragging rights. Otherwise, it would only give me incremental joy over the Base Carrera, which would do so much of what that car could. Now look, I haven't driven the new GTS, but from what I've read and heard, it does sound quite promising as its own model. But until that happens, I maintain my view that for anything under GT product, the Base 911 is just such a complete experience of exactly what a 911, or in fact what a Porsche should be, at an affordable price. I've always said a petrolhead needs to own a 911 at least once in their life, and the Base Carrera for me is that one. It ticks all the boxes and scratches that itch, but at the same time, for me, the Base Carrera is the car that is the purest representation of the brand that no other model could ever hope to be. Long live the Carrera. See you guys.